You would think our nation, after centuries of the same issues, would have figured out some way to mend ourselves, some way to be better as people, some way to be inclusive and fair to all. But it seems we are more divided than ever. We continue to fall short as a race of human beings, so I have to question human DNA at this point. It just may be that this is the reality of being human, and to be human, we will always have these same repetitive traits. A bill was introduced in Congress, followed by a Trump executive order to end federal DEI, and now a horrific plane and Black Hawk helicopter accident where President Trump immediately blames it on DEI. There's no better time to talk about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and there's no better way to understand the opinions of America and how disconnected we are than to listen to Congress have a robust conversation about it. On November 20th, 2024, that conversation happened when HR8706, the Dismantle DEI Act, was discussed by the House Oversight and Appropriations Committee. Listen to what our representatives said and why we need to be aware of who we are voting for. There is so much emphasis put on presidential elections, but knowing your Congress representative is just as important. Let's first discuss what H.R. 8706 is proposing. House Resolution 8706 was introduced by Representative Michael Cloud, a Republican representing the 27th District of Texas. This bill aims to ensure equal protection under the law and prevent racism within the federal government by prohibiting certain diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. Now let's look at the irony of what this bill proposes. It claims to prevent racism by prohibiting DEI practices. So let's get this straight. The bill will supposedly prevent racism by eliminating the practices that were implemented to prevent racism. Let me say that again. The bill will supposedly prevent racism by eliminating the practices that were implemented to prevent racism. Let's look at some notable opinions of H.R. 8706. As we analyze our different representatives' opinions, there are different parts of the bill that their opinions will focus on. Let's start out with Congresswoman Melanie Stansbury, a Democrat from the 1st Congressional District of New Mexico. She pointed out that the bill seeks to eliminate DEI hires that are deemed to have given unqualified people jobs they were not the most qualified for, but you have a president who is appointing unqualified people to fill his cabinet. Congressman Robert Garcia, a Democrat representing the 42nd District of California, also reiterated the unqualified cabinet appointments and how eliminating DEI would be an act of reversing civil rights, and like House Representative Stansbury, they both opposed the bill. Let's take a look.
Ms. Stansbury from New Mexico.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, and to the gentleman for bringing this bill before this markup here today. I will have an amendment on the bill later on in the debate, but, as I say often in this committee, I'm a former federal employee. I used to work at OMB. One of OMB's jobs is to help manage the federal workforce. They work very closely with OPM, and we deal a lot with, the regulations and the legal system around federal employment. And I really want to emphasize the comments that were made by the ranking member about how unusual this bill is. We just had a letter introduced into the record from the Heritage Foundation that is supporting this bill because of misguided efforts to essentially stoke segregation, division, and create a victim-oppressor narrative, essentially, is what this letter of support says. But what is particularly peculiar about this massive bill that's been introduced, and I want to note that the co-sponsor of this bill, or this primary sponsor of this bill in the Senate, is Mr. J.D. Vance, our Vice President-elect, is it literally, as the title says, is about dismantling diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in the federal government. It revokes executive orders. It amends the Civil Rights Act. and it amends other parts of the federal code that protect our federal employees. And then it has this peculiar section that the ranking member talked about, which is actually essentially creating lists of federal employees and contractors that would never be eligible to work for the federal government again. Now, we have a word for that in common parlance. We call it blacklisting. And blacklisting comes from the 1950s, when here in this House of Representatives, there was a committee on un-American affairs that was convened under Joe McCarthy. The purpose of that was to purge the federal government and to accuse federal employees and blacklist them from future federal employment. So I'd like to say, welcome to the new House Committee on Un-American Affairs and to the new McCarthyism, because we have arrived here today with this bill. So let's talk about what exactly is trying to be accomplished by this bill and by the upcoming administration, which the Vice President-elect is participating in here. Now, okay, let's take the argument to its logical extension that this is really about making sure that we have qualified individuals inside the federal government. So my question is then, why is the president-elect choosing absolutely unqualified cabinet secretaries to be at the head of every single agencies? We've got now a worldwide wrestling executive who's going to run education. We've got a sexual predator who was about to have a bipartisan report released by the House of Representatives to be our AG. We've got a Fox News commentator who's going to run the military for us. So if my colleagues across the aisle want to talk about qualifications, they want to talk about efficiency, they want to talk about the federal workforce, then let's talk about it, because you're talking about putting into place leadership in these federal agencies who are absolutely unqualified, who are dangerous, and know nothing about the agencies that they're about to be appointed to lead. So this is not about qualifications. This is not about having a qualified federal workforce. This is about laying the ground for the purge that they plan on January 20th and in the days afterwards. And we know that because the very organization for whom the chairman just submitted this letter of support is the Heritage Foundation, who wrote Project 2025, which gave us the blueprint for the purge itself and what they are planning inside every single one of these agencies. So we need to be clear-eyed about what this actually is and about what is trying to be accomplished, and why 4 weeks before we're about to adjourn for the holidays, the Republicans are bringing this bill to a markup without an actual hearing. This is modern McCarthyism. They are preparing for a purge. They are going after members of the federal government who are advancing because they are people of color, women, LGBTQ+, other members of our community who have been excluded systematically from participating in federal service and leadership positions, and then they're going to put their own unqualified loyalists in there to take out our federal workforce. That is what this bill is about. It's about creating a statutory framework to do that, and we're going to fight it every step of the way. With that, I yield back.
The lady yields back. Any other members seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman.
Do you? Is it who? I can't even remember. Okay, Mr. Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'll get him.
I do agree with the comments that have been said from House Democrats on the committee. I wanted to say a few things. I think we all want our agencies to serve the American people as efficiently as possible. We want to make sure that our federal employees are the most qualified and dedicated people to our country and our government. When I was mayor of Long Beach for the last 8 years, I had a workforce of about 6,000 people, including an incredible police department, firefighters, an efficient port. And one thing that I'll tell you that folks in my community value about working in our city was that they were working with diverse personalities, diverse people, folks that they learned from, that they made their work better, and vice versa. And so we know that inclusive workplaces actually also retain and are ways to recruit top talent. And so this type of actions and this bill does exactly the opposite of that. And in fact, I believe we will recruit less qualified individuals when you start removing incentives for diversity and for creativity in the workplace. And clearly this bill has nothing to do with good government. There's no common sense. And unfortunately, it's about purging, in my opinion, Donald Trump's enemies. Now, if the majority wants to make sure that our government runs more efficiently, they should start, and certainly the president-elect should start by actually appointing qualified people to run these government agencies. I mean, the nominee so far has been quite embarrassing as we've heard them from the president-elect. I mean, you have a Fox News personality for defense secretary. You have RFK Jr., who doesn't believe in vaccines, for Health and Human Services. You have Tulsi Gabbard, who has praised dictators and essentially, in my opinion, is a Russian propagandist for our intelligence services. You have Matt Gaetz, who has been accused credibly of sexual misconduct and a bunch of other horrific actions. These are the people, by the way, who the incoming administration would actually bypass security clearances, FBI tests, yet many of these same managers that are in these current agencies are required to take those same exact tests and exams. And so I think this is incredibly hypocritical when there are same members of this committee who are praising those agency heads that are going to be coming in who have had little scrutiny, and yet they want to remove important programs around diversity, around supporting all people, around uplifting equality within our government. So I strongly oppose this bill. I think this is moving us completely backwards and quite frankly violates a lot of the progress that we've made in the civil rights era. And so with that, Mr. Chairman and our ranking member, I yield back.
Congresswomen Summer Lee, a Democrat representing the 12th District of Pennsylvania, and Ayanna Pressley, a Democrat representing the 7th District of Massachusetts, reminded the House Oversight and Appropriations Committee of all the injustices perpetrated on marginalized people and why this bill reverses what DEI tries to accomplish and why DEI is necessary. Let's take a look.
Ms. Lee? Yeah, Ms. Lee, you're recognized.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not in favor of the Dismantle Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Act, or what it maybe would more aptly be called the dismantling any semblance of support or opportunity for certain American acts. We know who those Americans are, Americans who have not enjoyed centuries of unfair advantages by keeping others enslaved or segregated or disenfranchised or incarcerated or redlined or gerrymandered or excluded by law. Americans who've lived with disabilities or had their relationships criminalized or their gender expression demonized. If we're being honest here, this bill, which will wipe out every diversity, equity, and inclusion program in our federal agencies, plus those who contract with us, plus those who receive grant money, plus our schools, is nothing new. This is just the final piece of a decades-long obsession with targeting and dismantling anything that might give marginalized people a fair shot, including DEI programs, which honestly started the second the Civil Rights Act passed. Policies like affirmative action and diversity, equity, inclusion are the closest things we've had to the mythical bootstraps that some of my colleagues insist historically and currently harmed communities need to pick themselves up by. After centuries of efforts to keep us out of schools and universities, from jobs and elected office, Republicans targeting these policies are no accident. Why do predominantly conservative white men believe that the success of a black person or the opportunity or access of a black person is an existential threat to them? DEI is not given any unfair advantage that society itself does not already confer on certain Americans. It merely exists to ensure that all other people, that women, minoritized folks, queer folks, disabled folks, have the same opportunities to succeed and thrive in our workforce and our schools as people who have not had those opportunities systematically and legally stripped from them do. Is our country not greater when all of us have opportunities to succeed and contribute and survive? Our success and our survival as a nation is bound together. Diversity, equity, and inclusion programs only exist to band-aid over decades, hell, centuries of discrimination against people's skin color, their religion, disabilities, gender, or sexual orientations, you name it. Contrary to Republican conjecture, remedying past discrimination is not, in turn, a discrimination. And we're not going to sit here and pretend racism is over just because one black person on the Supreme Court agree that it should be. What DEI does not do is give some kind of magical pass to better jobs, like some of our colleagues are implying. That middle word, equity, does not mean more than or better than. It means treating people fairly and impartially. It means working to fix generational and systemic discrimination to the betterment of all of us in all of our institutions. But instead, Republicans are trying to bastardize the term DEI to be a slur. When Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson was up for confirmation and when Vice President Harris was added to the ticket, they called them DEI hires. They want you to believe that a Harvard graduate with over 20 years of experience, who happens to be a black woman, is not qualified, but a Fox News personality is qualified to run the Department of Defense, and the WWE executive is qualified to run the Department of Education. Let's be real. There is an attempt to create a direct correlation between our race, being a black person, and our qualifications. So much as to say that there is no way to be a black woman. There is no resume that a black person could have that would qualify them unless that black person is a Republican. And there is a quota there. And while all of this has happened at the top level of our government, I can promise you these same things are happening on every single level of government and private sector. But those people don't have a national platform to speak out against discriminatory treatment. Where is a federal worker supposed to turn when another coworker says a racist comment to them in the break room? Where is the same-sex couple who is denied housing supposed to, because of their relationship, supposed to turn? Where is a pregnant woman who was fired for being pregnant supposed to go? Often the only place that they have to give them recourse are the diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. These folks just want to do their jobs, serving the American people in an environment that feels safe and supports them. Making work a better, safer environment for some does not mean it automatically is worse for others. And those complaining about DEI training are probably the ones who need it the most. My Republican colleagues have got to stop punching down on already marginalized communities and face their own fears of a level playing field privately. It's shameful. I yield back.
Thank you. This bill, titled the Dismantling DEI Act, is an utter disgrace. Having sat and read the text in preparation for today's markup, I have yet another example to tell my constituents about the unserious work of the Republican Party. Now, I'll work with anyone serious about progress who wants to center the people who call this country home. This isn't it. The Committee on Oversight has the broadest jurisdiction in the entire House of Representatives to investigate any topic it chooses, but we are debating legislation that denies the sky is blue, water is wet, and racism is real. The major provision of the bill says to ban anything that acknowledges racism. And a few pages later in the exact same bill, there are multiple provisions discussing the presence of racism. This Republican approach is as predictable as it is nonsensical. On one hand, they're saying that racism does not exist. On the other hand, they are saying there is rampant reverse racism. Well, how do you reverse something that never existed in the first place? Riddle me that. While this Republican policy may have a new name, it's the same old tired game. Look, y'all are entitled to your opinions, but not a denial of the facts. Do you all know your history? Do you know American history? The original Constitution counted enslaved individuals as 3/5 of a person. During World War II, the federal government forcibly relocated and incarcerated 110,000 Japanese Americans. The FHA practiced redlining in the 1930s and 60s to deny mortgages to black Americans, which is why we have a racial wealth gap today. I could go on. The GI Bill, which is supposed to be race neutral, denied access to black Americans, denying them equal access to education and housing benefits, which is why we do not have generational wealth. Don't talk to me about merit when those black servicemen fought for our freedoms. And I'd also just like to take a personal note of privilege to say, please keep Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s name out of your mouths. Yes. Your perversion of his words and his mission when his children have asked you to stop invoking his name and perverting his work when he was a proud and unapologetic black man fighting for equality for black Americans and all marginalized people. So you all are entitled to your opinions, but not a denial of the facts. But I'm not surprised that you would deny American history. What I am, though, is committed. Committed to speaking truth to power, committed to standing up for marginalized communities and vulnerable people, committed to ensuring that everyone has equal opportunity to buy a house, to work a job, to pursue higher education, and to live in a society that is fair and just. A colleague across the aisle invoked the phrase of, "We must do everything to stop government-sponsored oppression." Well, I've just enumerated numerous examples, which is exactly why we have legislation and an executive order to reverse this harm. And that is why I'm committed to opposing this bill and urge my colleagues to do the same.
This is part 1 of a multi-part series on DEI, so please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. This video focuses on the opponent's views of HR 8706, but to understand the polarity of Congress, who represents the American people, we need to analyze differing opinions, which we will explore on upcoming videos. I would love to hear your views of DEI and if you approve or oppose HR 8706. Please leave a comment below. Let's put more love into the world and let's stop focusing on our differences. Go to my website, merchgorilla.com, to get these shirts that represent love and focus on being a decent human being when it's all said and done. Each sale supports this channel. The link is in the description below. Let's stay informed and keep our eyes on Congress. If you do not know who your House of Representative is, I will provide a link in the description below that takes you to a website where you enter your zip code to find out who your representative is. Subscribe to How Congress Voted to get important updates on what's going on inside the walls of Congress and to track your congressperson so you are better informed when it comes time to vote. Like, share, and subscribe.